My boss arranged my blind date with my ex-wife, and she did it on purpose. She picked the restaurant. She chose the time. She made sure I had no photograph, no name, no warning. She arranged every single detail of that blind date with the same cold precision she used to build a multi-million-dollar consultancy from nothing. But there was one detail my boss deliberately kept from me. One detail that would have stopped me from ever walking through that door. Because the woman my boss had spent weeks carefully describing to me as someone brilliant, someone driven, someone I needed to meet, was not a stranger. She was the woman I had been married to for 4 years, the woman who had begged me to see her and I could not. The woman who sat on the edge of our bed one October evening and told me that loving me from a distance was destroying her. The woman who gave me 10 seconds to fight for her, and I gave her nothing but silence. My ex-wife, and now my boss had arranged for us to sit across from each other again in a candlelit restaurant 2 years and 5 months after I signed the divorce papers without contesting a single line. I am Marcus Reed. I am 34 years old. I'm a senior brand strategist at Ridgeline and Partners, a boutique consultancy in Denver, Colorado. My boss is Catherine Ashford, the founder and CEO, a woman who has never made a careless decision in her life. But I need you to understand something before this story goes any further. My ex-wife did not leave me because of another man. She did not leave because of a betrayal or a fight or a single terrible moment. She left because I was in the room, but I was never really there. She left because she spent 2 years reaching for a man who had trained himself to disappear inside his own mind where she could never follow. And when she finally stopped reaching, I did not say a single word to stop her. Not one word. That silence is the reason we ended. But that silence is also the reason my boss arranged this blind date. Because Catherine Ashford saw something in me that I could not see in myself. And she believed the only person who could reach it was the one woman I had already lost. So why would my boss risk everything to arrange a blind date between a man and his ex-wife? What did Catherine know about us that we did not know about ourselves? What happened when I looked up from that menu and locked eyes with the one face I never expected to see again? What did my ex-wife say when she saw me sitting at that table? And what secret had I been carrying for over 2 years that my ex-wife deserved to hear but I had been too afraid to say out loud? Her name was Nora Bellingham, and I need to be honest about what I did to her, because the rest of this story falls apart if I am not. I was not a bad husband in any way you could point to and name. I did not cheat. I did not lie. I did not raise my voice or throw things or come home smelling like someone else. What I did was worse because it was invisible. I disappeared while still being physically present. I would sit across from Nora at dinner and be mentally rewriting a campaign brief. I would lie next to her at night and be solving a client problem in my head. She would ask me a question and I would answer it 4 seconds too late. And 4 seconds does not sound like much until it happens every single day for 2 years. And the woman sitting next to you slowly realizes that the man she married has trained himself to live inside his own head where she is not invited. But Nora tried. I want to make that clear because the rest of this story demands it. She tried in ways I did not fully appreciate until long after she stopped. She planned weekends away that I shortened. She started conversations that I let die in the middle of the sentence. She once left a handwritten note on my desk at home. I found it on a Tuesday evening between 2 stacks of client briefs. It said, "I miss you and you are right here." I read those 8 words. I felt something crack deep inside my chest, and then I set the note down and went back to work. That is the kind of man I was, not cruel, just gone. And gone is sometimes crueler than anything cruel could ever be. That October evening when everything ended, I came home and found her sitting on the edge of our bed. She still had her shoes on, her coat was still on, like she had walked through the door and had not even made it far enough into the apartment to take them off before she knew she had to say it. I stood in the doorway, and I could feel it in the air before she opened her mouth. The way you feel a storm coming before you see a single cloud. She looked up at me and said, "I have been trying to get you to see me for 2 years, and I am done. I cannot keep standing in a room with someone who is already somewhere else. I love you, Marcus, but loving you from this distance is destroying me. I sat down across from her. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything I needed to say required me to crack open a door I had spent my entire adult life keeping shut. A door that hid the one truth I had never spoken out loud to anyone. And I could not do it. Not then. Not in the one moment when it mattered more than any other moment of my life. She waited. She gave me 10 seconds. I know it was 10 because I counted them in my head the way a man counts the seconds before an explosion he cannot stop. And when I did not speak, she nodded once, slowly, like she had just received the answer she had been afraid of getting all along. She filed the papers 3 weeks later. I signed every page without contesting a single line. She took that as final proof that I did not love her enough to fight for her. But she was wrong about what my silence meant. I did not fight because I believed she deserved better than me. I let her go because I thought letting go was the most loving thing I could do. We were both wrong, and neither of us corrected it for 2 years and 5 months. After Nora left, I did something I should have done years earlier. I found a therapist named Dr. Ellison who sat across from me every Tuesday afternoon and asked questions that felt like someone gently pulling stitches from a wound I did not know was still open. It took 14 months. 14 months of sitting in that brown leather chair in that quiet office, staring at my hands while a patient man waited for me to find the words. 14 months to understand why I had spent my marriage hiding inside my career. 14 months to finally sit with a truth I had been running from since I was a boy. My father. My father had been the same man, not the same job, not the same city, but the same silence, the same absence. He had loved my mother, I believe that. But he worked 14-hour days, he missed birthdays, he sat at the dinner table and thought about contracts while his wife and son sat 3 feet away waiting for him to look up. My mother spent 25 years reaching for a man who was standing right in front of her. She never got there. She died still trying. And I had spent my entire adult life terrified of becoming him while quietly building an exact copy of everything he was. That was the door I could not open that October evening. That was the truth I could not speak. Not because I did not love Nora, but because telling her meant admitting that the thing I feared most had already happened. And I was not ready to face that. Not with her sitting right there watching me fail the same way my father had failed my mother. But by the time I understood all of this, Nora had been gone for over a year. She had moved across the country. She had changed her number. She had built a new life that did not include me. And I respected that because I owed her at least the peace of not being chased by the man who had failed to show up when it counted. I moved to Denver. I told myself it was for the job at Ridgeline. But the truth was that Chicago had too many corners that remembered. Us, our coffee shop on Dahmen Avenue, our park along the lakefront, the restaurant where I had proposed to her on a Thursday evening, because I could not wait until the weekend I had originally planned. Denver was clean. Denver did not know our names. Catherine Ashford hired me and I buried myself in the work. I took on every difficult account. I stayed late every night. I produced results that made Catherine look at me with an expression that sat somewhere between approval and worry, like watching someone build a beautiful house on a foundation that was quietly cracking underneath. Then, 8 months before the blind date, Catherine started watching me differently. She asked about my weekends, not casually, but specifically, like someone who is building a case. I would say I went hiking or stayed in, and she would nod in a way that told me she heard the word alone at the end of every sentence, even though I never said it. Then, 3 months before that Friday night, she started mentioning a woman, smart, early 30s, environmental consulting, had been through something difficult a few years back, had not dated seriously since. Catherine said this woman reminded her of someone on her team, the same competence, the same guardedness, the same habit of pouring everything into work so there was nothing left over for the messy parts of life. I said, that sounds like half the people in Denver. Catherine looked straight at me and said, it sounds like you. I should have listened closer. Catherine Ashford has never said a single thing by accident in her entire life. Then, one Thursday afternoon, she walked into my office, closed the door behind her, and said, "I have made a dinner reservation for you this Friday at 7:30 at Bellamy's on Blake Street. Your date will meet you there. I am not showing you a photograph because I think you will talk yourself out of going." I said, "Catherine, you cannot arrange blind dates for your employees." She said, "I am not arranging a date for an employee. I am helping a friend. You just happen to also work for me." I said, "What if I say no?" She said, "Then I will respect that completely and never mention it again." She paused. "But I think you should go, Marcus. I think you need this more than you realize." She let the silence sit. Catherine is brilliant at that. She creates space and waits for you to fill it with the truth. I said, "Fine. One dinner." She said, "That is all I am asking." She was lying. She was asking for far more than one dinner. I just did not know it yet. Friday arrived the way Fridays do when you are dreading something. Slowly, and then all at once. I left my apartment at 6:45 for a restaurant 14 minutes away. I got there at 6:59 and sat in my car in the parking lot for 22 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel staring at the restaurant sign through the windshield. That is not something a man who is fine with his life does. Bellamy's was upscale Italian, exposed brick walls, low amber lighting, candles on every table. It smelled faintly like something expensive. Tables spaced far enough apart that you could pretend you were the only two people in the room. Someone had chosen this restaurant very carefully. I suspected Catherine. I walked in at 7:21. I gave my name to the hostess. She led me to a two-top near the back wall with a clear view of the front entrance. She said my guest had not arrived yet. I sat down. I ordered water. I straightened my tie. Then I loosened it. Then I straightened it again. I read the wine list 3 times without absorbing a single word. At 7:28, the front door opened. I looked up. I'd been looking up every time that door opened for the past 7 minutes, scanning every face for any sign of someone looking for me. But the face that came through the door this time was not a stranger. Nora Bellingham walked into Bellamy's wearing a dark coat over a green dress. Her brown hair was shorter than I remembered. It fell just past her jaw. She was scanning the room the way she always scanned unfamiliar spaces, quickly, practically, cataloging exits and people and the general shape of things before committing to a single step forward. She had not seen me yet. I stood up, not because I decided to. My body just did it. The way you stand when the ground shifts beneath you and something deep in your spine tells you that you need to be on your feet for whatever comes next. She turned. Her eyes found mine. She stopped. Not a hesitation, not a slow down. A full and complete stop in the middle of a restaurant. One hand still gripping the strap of her bag, her face moving through something I could not fully read. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked like anger. And then something else underneath the anger that I did not have a name for, but that I had not seen in over 2 years. 5 seconds passed. They were the longest 5 seconds of my adult life, and I had already lived through 10 seconds of silence that I thought could never be matched. Nora said, "You have got to be kidding me." I said I did not know. She studied my face. That look she had, that specific way of reading a person like she was scanning a document for inconsistencies. She said, "Catherine Ashford sent you here." I said, "Yes." She said, "Catherine Ashford is your boss." I said, "Yes." She closed her eyes. She breathed once through her nose, controlled, deliberate, the way someone breathes when they are deciding between walking out of a room and sitting down in it. She opened her eyes. She walked to the table. She set her bag on the chair beside her. She sat down across from me. And she said, "1 drink. Then I am leaving." I sat down. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 4 years. This woman I had failed in ways I was still learning to name. This woman who had once left a handwritten note on my desk that said, "I miss you and you are right here." She was right here now, sitting across from me in a candlelit restaurant my boss had chosen. And for the first time in 2 years and 5 months, so was I. The 1 drink lasted 3 hours. I cannot tell you the exact moment the wall came down, because it did not come down all at once. It came apart in pieces, the way ice cracks in spring, not one dramatic break, but a slow series of fractures you do not notice until suddenly the whole surface is different. She ordered Pinot Noir without looking at the menu. I ordered the same because I could not think clearly enough to choose wine while sitting across from the woman I used to wake up next to every morning. The waiter left. We sat in silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that is so full of unsaid things that the air between two people becomes almost solid. Nora broke it first. She always did. Even in the worst months of our marriage, she was the one who kept reaching into the silence trying to pull something living out of it. She told me she had moved to Denver 8 months after the divorce. She said Chicago had too many corners that remembered us. I told her I had moved here for the same reason. She looked at me when I said that, and something shifted behind her eyes. Something guarded stepped aside just enough for me to see the person underneath. Then she put her glass down and said the thing I had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. She said, "Can I ask you something I have wanted to ask for 2.5 years?" I said, "Yes." She said, "That night when I told you I was leaving, why did you not say anything?" The restaurant noise pulled back like the room itself was making space for whatever I said next. I could feel 2 years and 5 months pressing down on this single moment. I said because the reason I shut down had nothing to do with you and everything to do with something I had never told you. She waited. Nora was always better at waiting than I was. I said my father. I told her how he had loved my mother but could never be present, how he worked 14-hour days and missed birthdays, and sat at the dinner table thinking about contracts while his family sat 3 feet away. How my mother spent 25 years reaching for him and never got there. How I spent my entire marriage terrified of becoming him while quietly building an exact copy of everything he was. How I stayed silent that night because telling her the truth meant admitting the thing I feared most had already happened. When I finished, the candles on our table had burned halfway down. Nora's eyes were bright. She did not cry, but she was close. She said I waited 10 seconds for you to say something that night. I counted. I told myself, if he says anything at all, I will sit back down and we will figure this out. I said I did not know that. She said I have spent 2 years being angry at you for those 10 seconds. I said I have spent 2 years being angry at myself. She picked up her wine. Her hand was steady. She said, "I wish you had told me this then." I said I wish I had known it then. Then she said something that changed the temperature of the entire evening. She said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something. I am seeing someone. His name was Grant." She said it carefully, watching my face the way you watch a glass you have just set too close to the edge of a table. She said he was an architect, 36, kind, stable. He showed up when he said he would. He answered when she called. He was present in a way that felt safe. Everything I had not been, I kept my expression neutral. It took more effort than any presentation I had ever given in my life. I said he sounds good. She said he is good. Then she paused. And she said he is good and I care about him, and I have been trying for 5 months to feel for him what I felt for you in the first 6 weeks of our relationship, and I cannot get there. The restaurant was almost empty now. I had not noticed. The candles were low. The waiter had stopped coming by. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "I do not know yet. I did not expect to see you tonight. I did not expect to hear you say any of what you just said. I need time to think." I said, "Take whatever time you need." She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You never used to say things like that." I said, "I never used to mean them." We split the check. We walked outside into the Denver night. The air was thin and sharp the way it gets at altitude in late autumn. Her car was parked 3 spots from mine. She stood by her door and did not get in. She said, "Marcus." I am glad Catherine did this. I did not think I would ever say that, but I am glad. I said, "Me too." She said, "Do not read too much into tonight." I said, "I will try not to." She said, "Try harder. I know you." She drove away. I stood alone in the parking lot with my hands shaking, not from the cold. 3 weeks passed. We texted, not with urgency, but with something more careful and more honest than urgency, like two people relearning a language they used to speak fluently. Then, on a Saturday morning, she texted and said I ended things with Grant. I stared at that message for a full minute. I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I'm not great about it. He did not deserve to be compared to a ghost for 5 months." She paused. Then she said, "After Bellamy's, I went home and sat in my living room for 2 hours replaying what you told me about your father. And I realized that in 5 months with Grant, I had never once sat replaying something he said. Not because he was not worth listening to, but because nothing he said ever cracked anything open in me. You did that in one night, whether I wanted you to or not. We met for coffee that weekend. A small place on Tennyson Street with mismatched chairs and a barista who took his craft more seriously than most surgeons. She ordered black with 1 sugar, the same way she always had. I ordered something with too much foam, and she looked at it with the same quiet disdain she had aimed at every coffee I had ever ordered during our entire marriage. Some things do not change, and I was grateful for every single one of them. Over the next 4 months, we rebuilt something that had no name yet because naming it felt too soon. But it was not the same thing we had lost. It was something with the foundation of the original but completely different architecture on top. We hiked every other weekend because Nora said mountains strip away pretension. We had dinner on Tuesdays. We talked about the things that had broken us, not once but over and over, circling back whenever something new surfaced. Then, 3 months in, I made a mistake. Ridgeline landed its biggest account ever. Catherine put me at the center. Within 2 weeks, I was canceling Tuesday dinners, staying late, slipping back into the oldest pattern I owned. Nora called me on a Friday at 8:40. I was still at the office. She said, "I need you to hear this as someone who loves you and not someone attacking you. You're doing it again." I went still. She had said loves. She had not said that word since the divorce. She said it like it had always been there, woven into the sentence like thread that had never been. Pulled out. I said, "I know. I can hear myself becoming the thing I swore I would never become again." She said, "Then come home." I saved my file. I turned off my monitor. I drove to her apartment. She opened the door and said, "Sit down." She sat across from me and said, "You are going to tell Catherine on Monday that you need support on this project." I do not need sorry, Marcus. I need different. Sorry is a word. Different is a pattern. I wrote that on the back of a receipt that night. It is still in my wallet. I went to Catherine on Monday and asked for help. She looked at me and said, "I've been waiting for you to ask since week 1. 6 months after Bellamy's, I drove to the waterfront on a Tuesday evening by myself. The mountains were dark against a sky full of stars. I stood at the railing and thought about the man who had sat in a parking lot for 22 minutes because he could not walk into a restaurant. I thought about 10 seconds of silence that had cost me everything. I thought about a handwritten note that said, "I miss you and you are right here." I had the ring in my jacket pocket. I had been carrying it for 9 days. The next evening I told Nora I wanted to show her something at the waterfront. She said it was cold. I said I knew. She put on her coat. We stood at the railing. She looked out at the water and said, "Okay, what did you want to show me?" I turned to face her. I took the box out of my pocket. She saw it and went completely still. I said I spent years telling myself that silence was the same as strength and that keeping people at a distance was the same as protecting them. Then you sat across from me at a restaurant we both almost never walked into, and you asked me why I did not fight for you. And the answer to that question cracked open every door I had spent my whole life keeping shut. You deserved that answer 2 years ago. I was not brave enough then. I am brave enough now. I do not want to spend another day choosing silence over you, not one more day. She put her hand over her mouth. I said, "Nora Bellingham, will you marry me?" She said yes. Then she laughed because she was crying, and Nora does not cry easily, which made her laugh harder. I stood up and she grabbed the front of my jacket and held on, and I held on to her while the wind came off the mountains and the city moved around us completely unaware. My phone buzzed 11 minutes later. It was Catherine. The message said, "Well done, Marcus. Welcome back to the family. Dinner Sunday. This is not optional." I showed Nora the message. She read it and shook her head and said she's going to be completely unbearable about this. I said she already is. Nora looked up at me and smiled, small and real and completely unguarded, the same way she used to smile before I taught her to stop. She said, "I'm glad I did not walk out of that restaurant." I said, "Me too." She tucked herself against me, and we stood there looking out at the same water where everything was still uncertain, just months ago, when neither of us knew what we were building. Now we knew. And it turned out to be the most solid thing either of us had ever stood on. Now I want to ask you something from the heart. Have you ever lost someone not because of anger or betrayal, but because of silence? Have you ever held back the one thing you needed to say and watched the person you loved walk away because they never heard it? And if you got a second chance to say it, would you be brave enough this time? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please rate our channel. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Every story we tell is made for people like you who believe in second chances and the power of finally saying what should have been said a long time ago. And before you go, tell us where you are watching from. Drop your country, your city, your corner of the world in the comments. We want to know exactly where this story landed tonight. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next one.